The sound wasn't loud, but it carried. A thin, deliberate splash, followed by a breath of silence so sharp it felt like the room had been cut open. Laughter came next, uneven and cruel, echoing off marble and gold. In the middle of it stood a woman who did not move. Wine slid down the sleeve of her ivory gown, dark against the fabric, but her posture stayed perfectly straight. What the room didn't know was that the moment they laughed was the moment everything they celebrated that night began to unravel. The gala filled the upper floors of the Atlas Crown Hotel, a place designed to make people feel important simply by standing inside it. Crystal chandeliers hung low, mirrors multiplied the crowd, and every conversation floated on the assumption of power. Deals had been whispered into existence here. Careers had been erased with smiles. It was a room where people believed consequences were for others. Elena Cross stood near the center of the ballroom, one hand resting lightly on a champagne flute she hadn't touched. She was the CEO of Crosswave Dynamics, a technology firm that had grown too fast for some people's comfort and too quietly for their liking. Earlier that evening, she had signed a partnership agreement worth just over $2 billion with Halcyon Holdings. The deal had been applauded on stage, photographed, toasted, but applause, Eleanor knew, was temporary. Behavior was permanent. The whispers started before the spill. They always did. Who is she with? Is she really the decision-maker? She doesn't look like the others. Elena heard them the way one hears rain through glass. Present, but distant. She had learned long ago that reacting too early only fed the narrative others wanted to write for her. Then Madison Hale appeared. Madison moved through the crowd like she owned the oxygen. She was the younger sister of Halcyon's founder, a woman famous for nothing except proximity to wealth and an unshakable belief that it made her untouchable. Her dress shimmered deep red, matching the wine in her glass, and her smile was sharpened by an audience. "Well," Madison said, stopping just close enough to invade space, "you must be the genius everyone's talking about." The words were polished. The tone was not. Eleanor met her eyes calmly. "I'm one of them," she replied. Madison laughed too loudly. "Bold," she said, swirling her glass. "My family loves bold investments." She leaned in, lowering her voice just enough to sound intimate. "Though some things can't be bought. Access, belonging." She paused, letting the implication do its work. Elena's expression didn't change. "Some of us don't need invitations," she said. "We build rooms." The insult landed where Madison hadn't expected it to. Her smile tightened. For half a second, something ugly flickered across her face. Then she tipped her wrist. The wine spilled. It soaked Elena's shoulder, slid down her arm, and splashed onto the marble floor. A few people gasped. Someone laughed. Then more joined in, relieved to follow rather than lead. Phones rose. The humiliation was being archived in real time. Madison stepped back, feigning surprise. "Oh no," she said sweetly. "I didn't even see you there." The words were a blade, carefully placed. Elena didn't look at the stain. She didn't look at Madison. She lifted her head and scanned the room instead, memorizing faces. The ones enjoying this. The ones pretending not to see. The ones calculating which side they would need to be on in 5 minutes. She reached into her clutch and took out her phone. That alone unsettled a few people. Drama was expected. Anger. Tears. What they got was quiet. Eleanor unlocked the screen, scrolled once, and tapped a name. When she spoke, her voice was low, controlled, almost gentle. "Activate Clause 7, she said. Then she ended the call. Madison frowned. "What was that supposed to be?" she asked, trying to laugh it off. Elena finally looked at her. "You'll feel it," she said. Across the ballroom, screens mounted near the bar flickered as live financial news refreshed. A hedge fund manager glanced down at his phone and went still. Another checked his notifications twice, as if the words might rearrange themselves. Breaking news. Crosswave Dynamics suspends strategic partnership with Halcyon Holdings, effective immediately. The laughter died in pieces. Madison's face drained of color. "That's not funny," she said, her voice suddenly thin. "It's not humor," Eleanor replied. "It's governance." A man pushed through the crowd, phone pressed to his ear, jaw tight. Thomas Hale, Halcyon's CEO, Madison's older brother. He looked from the notification on his screen to the wine on Elena's dress, then to Madison. "What happened?" he demanded. Madison opened her mouth, but Eleanor spoke first. "Your organization violated our conduct and ethics provisions," she said evenly. Publicly. Documented. The partnership is terminated. You can't do that over a misunderstanding, Thomas snapped, though his confidence was already cracking. I didn't, Elena said. I did it over culture. Around them, the room had shifted. People were no longer watching Eleanor to see her fall. They were watching the Hales to see how badly they would bleed. Investors whispered. Advisors typed furiously. Someone dropped a glass, and no one laughed. Thomas lowered his voice. Let's discuss this privately. Eleanor shook her head. You made it public, she said. I'm just responding in the same language. She stepped past him, moving toward the stage. Without asking permission, she took the microphone from its stand. The sound system hummed as every conversation cut off. This room likes to confuse power with immunity, she said, her voice carrying without strain. Tonight was a reminder that they are not the same. She glanced once at the crowd. What you allow is what you become. She set the microphone down and walked away, the stain on her dress still visible, unaddressed, undeniable. Behind her, the gala collapsed into frantic motion. Calls were made. Statements were drafted. Lawyers were summoned. Elena didn't look back. Outside, the night air was cool. Her driver opened the car door, eyes wide with questions he didn't ask. As the car pulled away, Eleanor finally looked down at her sleeve. She smiled, just slightly. The damage had already been done. The silence she left behind was louder than any insult that had come before it. When Soraya crossed the threshold of the ballroom doors, the music still hadn't resumed. No one dared signal the orchestra. Guests stood frozen in small clusters, clutching phones that refreshed the same headline again and again, hoping it would change if they looked long enough. It didn't. The Sterling Group partnership was gone, not threatened, not paused. Gone. And with it, the illusion that power in that room was untouchable. Inside, Isabella Sterling felt the weight of eyes turn on her. Not sympathetic eyes, calculating ones. The kind that assessed liability, not emotion. A man she'd laughed with moments earlier stepped back, creating distance as if arrogance were contagious. Her lips parted, searching for words that would restore her place, but the room no longer responded to her voice. She was no longer entertainment. She was risk. Charles Sterling stood rigid near the center, his phone pressed to his ear, voice lowered but sharp. Get legal, now. His confidence was still there, but cracked, like glass with a fracture running just beneath the surface. He'd built his empire on leverage, on pressure, on the assumption that no one would ever walk away from his money. Soraya hadn't just walked away. She'd exposed how fragile the foundation really was. Outside, Soraya slid into the back seat of the car. The city lights streaked across the tinted glass as her assistant scrolled through updates, his composure barely holding. Investors are reacting fast, he said. Sterling's secondary partners are calling emergency meetings. 2 hedge funds just pulled support. Soraya nodded once. She wasn't watching the chaos. She was already past it. Decisions like hers didn't live in the aftermath. They lived in intention. By the time the gala ended, the narrative had shifted completely. The leaked video of the wine spill was everywhere, but it wasn't the humiliation that held attention. It was what came after. The absence of panic, the restraint, the single word spoken into a phone, followed by consequences no one could stop. Analysts replayed it frame by frame, not to mock, but to study. How power had moved without spectacle. How silence had done what outrage never could. The Sterling Group's board convened before dawn. The room was smaller, darker, stripped of ceremony. Screens showed falling numbers in unforgiving red. Advisors spoke in clipped sentences about exposure, ethics clauses, reputational bleed. Charles listened, jaw clenched, realizing too late that the clause he'd waved off during negotiations had been written by Soraya herself. Integrity violations, public conduct, non-negotiable. He'd signed it, assuming it would never be used against him. That assumption now cost hundreds of millions. By morning, Isabella's name had vanished from the guest list of every upcoming event. Invitations quietly disappeared. Calls went unanswered. Influence evaporated faster than it had ever been gained. She sat alone in a penthouse that suddenly felt much smaller, scrolling through commentary that didn't mention her feelings, only her mistake. She had poured wine expecting dominance. What she'd poured instead was exposure. Saria woke early, as she always did. The world was loud now, but her apartment was quiet. She reviewed statements drafted by her communications team, then deleted them. She didn't need paragraphs. She needed truth. One line. Clear. Unapologetic. She posted it just after sunrise. Respect is not a courtesy, it is a requirement. No logo, no explanation. The response was immediate. CEOs shared it, employees screenshotted it, commentators tried to dissect it, none improved it. Later that day, she stood before her board. They didn't question her decision. They thanked her for it. The numbers spoke louder than fear ever could. Stock had surged. New partnership requests flooded in. Many from companies that had once hesitated to approach her. Not because they doubted her ability, but because they feared her standards. Now they understood those standards were the asset. Across the city, the Sterling Group released a statement filled with words like regret and misunderstanding. The market ignored it. Apologies that arrive after consequences always do. Investigations followed. Then resignations. Then silence. The empire didn't explode. It deflated. Slowly, publicly, irreversibly. Weeks later, Soraya was invited to speak at a global leadership forum. The room was vast, filled with people accustomed to being heard. When she stepped to the podium, she didn't mention the gala. She didn't mention the wine. She spoke about systems, about how power reveals itself not in contracts but in moments where someone believes they can diminish another without cost. Silence, she said, meeting the room's gaze, is not weakness. It is often restraint, deciding whether something is worth ending. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous at first. It built slowly, like understanding spreading across faces. Not admiration, recognition. That night, alone again, Soraya stood by her window, city lights steady below. Her phone buzzed with one final notification. Sterling Group stock had closed down another 6%. She turned the screen off without looking further. Numbers were temporary. The message had already landed. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't demanded an apology. She hadn't asked anyone to choose sides. She had simply withdrawn permission for arrogance to exist in her orbit. And the world, unprepared for that kind of power, had reorganized itself accordingly. True authority, she knew, doesn't announce itself. It waits. And when it moves, it doesn't ask who's watching. It decides.